and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we were reviewing Spider-Man 2, the 2004 sequel to Spider-Man.
Yeah,
I guess still mostly the same creative team.
For the most part, I guess. I think there's quite a few different writers this time.
Oh, really?
So this movie is directed by Sam Raimi, obviously. Screenplays by a man named Alvin Sargent. I don't know who that is. I don't know if I've ever heard that name or not. Story by Alfred Goh, Miles Miller, and Michael Chabon.
Okay.
Obviously still based on the comic by Stanley and Steve Ditko.
No way.
For real? No way.
For real.
Starring mostly the same people, except we have a new villain this time around. Yes. So we got Toby Mcguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, Rosemary Harris still as Aunt May, and Donna Murphy, who I believe is the wife of Dr. Octavius, if I'm not mistaken. She's not as important. But yes, that's who it is. Music again by Danny Elfman, and this movie was released June 30th of 2004. Has a runtime of 127 minutes. Budget increased a little bit this time to $200 million in 2004. It's pretty hefty.
It's a big budget.
But it only made $789 million. So
Darn.
Went down a little bit from the last one, if I think so.
Yeah, but I think I've been talking this movie up. Again, this is one of the first movies that I remember actually going to the theater to see. Yeah. I have memories of going and seeing it at the drive-in. I know for sure I went and saw it. So, this is one of the first. I remember seeing it like 3 or 4 times in theater. So, this is one of the first one I have vivid memories of actually going and watching. So, obviously, it's got a lot of nostalgia value for me.
Definitely.
I really was excited to revisit this movie for the podcast.
For sure.
The YouTube channel. But anyway, getting back, watching this movie this time and, paying attention to all the details, this movie is kind of slow at the beginning, especially towards the beginning of the movie. We have, the opening sequence, of course, with the pizza thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of exciting and kind of fun. And it sets again the tone that it's not gonna take itself
too
seriously the whole movie. It's gonna still have that fun kind of comic booky vibe. And I think that opening scene is a fun way to reintroduce us to Spider-Man and where he's at in his life, with the job and
definitely
that he immediately gets fired from.
I think this movie takes place, if I'm not mistaken, I read about 2 years after the first one. So
she says at some point 2 years after Uncle Ben died. Yeah. So, I think that's a good scene. But yeah, there's a lot of setup in the first half of this movie, and there's a couple of action scenes, but really prior to that bank scene, they're not really exciting, not really anything special.
No, we have like the chase scene where he's trying to get to the play on time, I believe.
Yeah.
And he almost gets run over by a car and does some flips and some stuff and has to chase them down. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of action in the first 30 or so minutes of this movie, I guess.
And of course, we set up around the 30-minute mark that he's starting to lose his powers.
He's having a psychological issue.
Yeah, he's obviously they're doing the Superman 2 thing, and now almost every superhero sequel does the whole gotta lose their powers and forget it thing. But obviously, like I said, Superman did it first, but I think this movie handles it pretty well. I think it's a good arc for Spider-Man that he's something's wrong psychologically with him, that he's losing his powers, but he kind of wants to at the same time because he sees all these things in his life that he wants to do, but because he's Spider-Man, he can't.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best parts about this movie is that inner conflict that Peter Parker has throughout this movie of if he should continue to be Spider-Man or if he should get what he really wants, which is a normal life and a family or a girlfriend and just your average life, I guess. And I think that makes for a great arc for him in this movie.
And there's a lot of.
I think that's what makes this movie a lot better than a lot of comic movies is that we have a more grounded story for our character.
And this time around, we also have a more nuanced villain in Alfred Molina. What is his name?
Alfred Molina.
Molina. I can't remember his last name. Alfred Molina's Doc Ock.
Yeah.
You can tell. I think really with the first indicators in the scene where he first tries to start up this fusion reactor, that he loves his wife and he loves science, but he's also obsessed with this fusion reactor and getting it to work because he has the line, he's like, I have the power of the sun in the palm of my hand or whatever. And that shot you were talking about where they kind of did the same thing where they did with the shot in the first movie where you could see 2 different scenes in each of Spider-Man's eyes where you can see like one's
bright
sunglasses
and
is
yellow,
reflecting the fusion. The other one's solid black.
Kind of the inner struggle that he's gonna have.
And he's gonna have an inner struggle that he's he wants this fusion reactor to work. It's like his life's
But
work.
really, at heart, he's a good guy.
Yeah, and he's also got these mechanical arms which are sentient.
Yeah, they have AI built into them, and we had this whole setup about this inhibitor chip on the back of his neck or whatever that's supposed to prevent the AI from taking over, but it gets fried during the
I think it's kind of an undersold part of this movie that he has invented artificial intelligence, but we got this fusion reactor thing, whatever.
It's casual. It's casual.
But no, I really, Alfred Molina, he's not your typical super villain. Like, he's not a super fit guy. He spends a lot of this movie shirtless, but he's not your super fit, like, young, rocking a six-pack super villain, or even
he's not even as good a shape as, like, say, Willem Dafoe.
Well, I was gonna say Willem Dafoe. He's not like a young guy, but he was in really good shape for that role. And
yeah, he's kind of, I guess, what you would consider, I guess, a dad bod.
He's got a dad bod rocking, and he's not when we were talking about Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe. I love Green Goblin, but he was much more of a, he was absolutely off the wall crazy.
Yeah.
And of course, when you cast Willem Dafoe, that's what you want. He was just, you could tell he was just completely crazy. This guy, he's still, he does kind of lose it during the course of the movie, but he's still more there.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes him a better villain than the Green Goblin is, we have a character that you can kind of, a villain that you can kind of be sympathetic with because, yes, he's going crazy, but at the same time, deep down that he's just a scientist and he's a good guy. He's got a good heart.
And he lost his wife during the first experiment.
Yeah, he lost his wife, and he's just trying to do right, but he's kind of being controlled in the background by these arms or whatever, and his inner determination and drive to rebuild this machine. But
yeah.
I think it makes for a compelling villain. So.
I think it does too. Although I will say, like, the biggest plot hole I have with this entire movie is that they establish in a couple different scenes that these arms have spikes in them.
Yeah, like a blade or something.
And basically. I'm like, there are so many opportunities where he has Spider-Man in his arms. I'm like, he could just kill him right then. But he only uses the spike when it's convenient for the plot. But whatever, I'll because I'm having so much fun with this movie, I'll look over it. And, I think, I talked about the first half being slow and, we have the whole Spider-Man loses his powers and all this. But I think really once we hit this train scene, which I guess is really once the third act starts.
Yeah.
This third act is still one of the best third acts in super movie history.
That train sequence is still one of the best action sequences I've seen in a super movie.
Yeah, a couple of sketchy effect shots aside. Yes. Yeah. But overall, I think the effects are an improvement over the last
But I think, honestly, we consider that a great scene, but the climax of this movie is, I guess, technically, that the third act, I guess, is the climax, but, like, it finishes off more subtle with this. There's not like this big giant battle in the last 15, 20 minutes. They're in this abandoned. It's a fire station essentially. I think is what it looks like to me.
Some kind of lake house.
Some sort of warehouse or something like that on the river.
Yeah, on
but
the river.
It's more subdued.
Yeah,
he kind of just goes in there and tries to stop him, and then they have a conversation.
Yeah,
and he's like,
obviously the train sequence is the big action set piece on this movie, and it is done amazingly. Like I said, a couple of dated CGI shots aside, the action is amazing, and there's been so many superhero movies. I think of the Wolverine and stuff like that. They've tried to copy it.
It gets your emotions high too. Yeah. He's struggling to stop this train, trying to save these people, and you get the shots of his suit tearing and stuff like that. How much effort he's putting in, and then at the end when he stops it, he just kind of falls limp, and
but they catch him.
The city, and
crowd surfing back to the back of the train.
This huge moment, this really really awesome moment of them realizing, he's just a guy.
Yeah. He's just a kid. He's no older than my son.
He's just one of them. He's a New Yorker.
And then the little kids bring his mask to him, and they're like, "We won't tell nobody." And then Doc Ock shows up and takes him anyway.
Got him. But speaking of effects, I think the effects for the most part. There's some rough CGI and a couple shots. Mostly when like humans are being thrown around, they're pretty rough.
Whenever they fully CGI humans,
it's a little sketch. There's some shots, some green screen shots where you can kind of see the blue outline.
When they have the little girl in the burning apartment, like I guess probably because of the color mismatch, that you can see the blue outline when she's against the fire.
But other than that, the effects hold up pretty well. I think there's a slight increase over the first movie. Him swinging through the air looks a little bit better this time around. The CGI arms look really good. The Doc Ock's arms, they look pretty good, except for a couple shots.
And then the practical.
I think the practical effects are really good. The practical arms are great, and that warehouse or whatever is a model that they built, and they actually drowned it in a pool or whatever at one point in time, which is really cool. So. And
Sam Raimi's direction of this film is really great. I want to talk about specifically that hospital scene.
You can really feel his horror.
Feels like something out of the Evil Dead, where these arms come alive. And
the aspect ratio changes, and you can like feel it's framed and presented in a completely different way than the rest of the movie.
The only thing that's missing is blood splatter, but obviously couldn't get away with that in a PG-13 movie.
And there's a reference to Evil Dead with the chainsaw, and he tries to saw off the arm.
The woman with her fingernails dragging across the floor. Oh, that gets me every time.
That sound is awful.
Oh god, it's terrible. But no, I really enjoy that scene.
Oh, it's so good. And there's a couple other parts in this movie, where you can really feel his horror background. The scene where Doc Ock is going to talk to Harry about getting more tritium, and he walks up that wall, and there's that jump scare. It was really good.
And then at the end,
it scared me the first time. I remember when I watched it as a kid. It scared me when I watched it.
There's a jump scene at the end where Harry turns around, the Green Goblin mask is like right behind him or something. But no, I think that's great. And Harry again, he's back in this movie. I think his
character arc in this movie is more a setup for the third movie, what they were going for. I think that he had his plan for the third movie when he started this movie. And then, we'll talk about the third movie next week, but when that studio interference came in, it just kind of didn't play out the way he wanted it to.
Because we have Harry at the end of the film, he finds his father's evil hidden lair.
And straight up would have been the post-credit scene if they did that.
Set up for, I don't know if just the third movie, but for future, I think for several future movies, we have Dr. Connors, who, of course, in the comics would later become the Lizard. We have John Jameson, who finds Venom on the moon.
Yep.
So, we have a lot of setup for future entries in this franchise that a lot of them, some of them come to fruition, some of them don't.
Yeah.
But no, I think, but this movie doesn't get caught up in world building or franchise building like some of the MCU does at times.
Definitely.
Or DCU or whatever. But I think as a whole this movie is still really great.
I think it's still one of the best comic movies that's been made. I think it's if not the best, it's up there in the top probably 2 or 3. So
yeah, definitely. I did want to talk about Kirsten Dunst real quick. I still don't like her. She still screams a lot. I think she's a little more subdued in this movie.
She doesn't scream as much.
I think some of her line readings are a little better this time.
We get to see her act
on stage. I think Rosemary Harris is probably the best actress or actor in this whole movie. She's got some really great scenes in this movie, some really great monologues, and I love the kind of ambiguity towards the end of the movie. It's like, does she know that he's Spider-Man? Does she not? Because that speech she gives when she's packing up all her things, kind of leads you to believe that she almost would have to know. I mean, that she figured it out during that whole bank sequence earlier. And then Toby Mcguire again, some of the line readings are a little rough, and he's not always great.
He's still pretty goofy.
But I think he is very easy to buy as this really geeky, goofy guy. Definitely. I think that's what he's best at, and I think he still pulls that off really well in this movie. So, which of course, he was almost replaced by Jake Gyllenhaal, which I think would be a totally different Spider-Man. I'm glad I like Jake Gyllenhaal. Obviously, he'll be in a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but I think I'm glad that they stuck with Toby Mcguire. But
other than that.
You ready for some final thoughts?
Yeah. Before we do that,
let's plug ourselves.
Yeah. So, we're up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We actually just changed our name today, so we're gonna do a little bit of a rebrand.
You'll see at the beginning our title was a little bit different at the beginning of the video.
So rebrand, new logos. Yeah. Makes us a little bit easier to find on social medias and on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So now we're gonna be calling ourselves DNA Film Reviews. Yeah. That's probably not going to be all of our content. When new trailers start coming out, we'll still do some trailer reactions. I'm thinking about doing a collection video. I got about 400 movies sitting in this room behind us. Yeah. So maybe Aaron will help me with that, and maybe we can do one for Aaron in a while. But he's got a lot of movies too, so they'd be long videos.
I got some more.
He's got some very obscure things.
But
other than that, like I said, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we're at DNA Film Reviews on all those. So make sure you give us a like or a follow. Be sure to tell your friends about us. Other than that,
it allows us to have our own handle and avoid lawsuits.
Other than that, if you like hearing us talk, we do have a podcast if Aaron wants to tell you about it.
That's right. We have a podcast totally dedicated to giant monster films, and that podcast is called Stomp This Way, that you can find on any major pod-catching service.
Definitely.
But other than that, are you ready for Buy It, Stream It, Skip It?
Let's do it.
All right, I'll let you start this time.
I'm going to say buy it for sure. again, sitting right back there in that fancy steelbook.
Yeah.
I think this is a fantastic movie. It's so well written. All the characters are, our main character, our hero and our villain are written in a way that, each one of them is dealing with an internal conflict in this film. Peter Parker and Spider-Man are dealing with the fact, he wants to be this hero, and he feels this obligation to be this hero because he's been given these powers. But at the same time, he wants to be just a normal guy and have a girlfriend and have a family, later in life. But I think that part of this movie, it really helps ground this character more in reality, even though this is still a kind of a cheesy, campy movie.
Yeah.
And it's still very very comic book feeling.
Yeah.
And then our villain, is also dealing with that internal conflict of, he really has this obsession over this, science experiment that he's working on for this fusion reaction. But he's really a good guy at heart, and he cares about people and he cares about his family, even though his wife dies at the beginning of this film. It's really great, the internal struggle that both these characters are dealing with. Yeah. And I think it makes for more sympathetic characters, even the villain. That's always been one of my favorite parts about this movie. The action's still really good. I mean, that train sequence is still hands down one of the best action sequences I've ever seen in a superhero movie. It's fantastic. And then after he stops that train, just the interaction that he has with the people on the train is a great moment. But overall, I think it's a fantastic movie. Effects hold up pretty well. Acting is fantastic in this movie by Alfred Molina as the villain. I think he's great. Toby Mcguire still pulls off, his very good Peter Parker in this film. But overall, I think it's a great movie. It's one of the best superhero movies ever made, and definitely I still think the best Spider-Man movie ever made.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think if I'm looking at comparing and contrasting this one with the first one, I think the only advantage I would give the first one off the top of my head is I think the first one is a little bit paced a little bit better. But aside from that, I think this movie, despite some maybe plotting in the first half, I think when this movie is rolling, it rolls really high. The emotional highs are great. Like you said, the villain is more nuanced this time. Not necessarily better, but more nuanced. The action set pieces are great. This is beautifully directed by Sam Raimi. There are some great shots in this movie, and some of the horror-esque scenes in it are really fun.
Definitely.
So yeah, I really love this movie. Obviously, it's a buy, and watch it over and over. I think if I was doing a top 5 superhero films, I think this would probably still be in my top 5 of all time. So, yeah, I love this movie a lot.
For sure. If you like hearing us talk about Spider-Man, next week, or probably this week, we are going to wrap up the Sam Raimi trilogy with Spider-Man 3, unfortunately.
Well,
it has its moments.
We'll talk about the ups and downs.
We'll talk about it. Other than that, we have a couple things coming up. I think we're going to do Bill and Ted 1 and 2, and then Bill and Ted 3 is supposed to come out end of August, early September, I think. Hopefully, maybe. Other than that, I think we have Kingsman planned, and Tenet's supposed to come out tentatively now, tentatively for September 3rd, I think. So hopefully that comes out then. A couple other things in the works. We got Candyman in the works, the 3 of those, and then the new one, and some other stuff.
And we're planning on doing the Alien franchise, I think, in November through
toward
December.
the end of the year,
But aside from that, I think that's all we got for you this week. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you next time.
Catch you guys later.